Welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight, and today GaryWayne is back, and we will talk about Gaia, Ninhursag, Ishtar, Isis, and a lot of goddesses and gods. We will see, and we will also talk about what that has to do with our time. So, welcome back, Gary.
Well, thank you for inviting me back, and so happy to be here. And I think this is going to be a very interesting conversation. And I think, I think people aren't quite awake yet to why it's important to understand some of this stuff. So, and what, it doesn't matter what position you have on it, one needs to understand it. So when you start to see things, or you're seeing things that are going on in the world today, you may understand it a little bit better.
Yeah, and since you are mentioning it, we talked many times on this show. We talked about Putin, the Putinians, and the different bloodline families. Yeah. So from a more, let's say, occult point of view, what do we see right now with the hysteria with Ukraine and war and no war? So what do you think is going on?
Yeah, beginning of sorrows. Yeah, beginning of sorrows, wars and rumors of wars. It's the jostling of the New World Order. So, and I think we've probably talked about it in the past that, President Trump wanted a larger role for the US than what the Europeans wanted. Putin has the same ambition. Xi has the same ambition. The occult views the world that it should be divided into 10 groups of nations, spheres of influence. Here, you expect to hear spheres of influence more and more and more. I've been using it for 20 or 25 years. Whether or not it's formed through that sphere of influence or a trading block, however it comes together, the council, the Club of Rome, established in the late 60s and early 70s, when they're established that the world should be in 10 different sort of zones, economic zones or whatever. And so now it's a matter of those borders. And so whether or not they'll be exactly how the Club of Rome laid it out, or they'll be a little bit different, there's going to be 10 in the end. And we know that from biblical prophecy, there's going to be 10 kings in the end time empire. And that's the jostling that we're going on. So you look at the Putins and the Putyanin and the original czars, and they're the ones who also, produced and moved the dynasty to Moscow that was taken over by the Romanovs. So you've got that history. And Putin is from the Ukraine. That's where his name comes out of nowhere, from the Putyanin in about the 1850s or so with his grandfathers. So he's reestablishing that Scythian, Tartarian, whatever you want to call it, empire, Gog, Magog. There's lots of different names that people want to do it. The old Soviet sort of empire, or however you want to call that, he's reestablishing that as one of those major kings and positioning for his role in the New World Order. And so that partnership deal with China that was announced the day before the Olympics, or on the day of the opening of the Olympics, that's going to be a big deal, because they're going to be supporting each other, and expect that they're going to be working towards not only an alliance that stands against the US and the West, but also a new economic system. They're going to challenge it in ways we've not thought about before. And I don't know how successful they're going to be, but I do know this is not going to be settled amicably in the beginning. So there's going to be conflict until you have the universal covenant that's going to be negotiated by AntiChrist for the last 7 years, that promises peace twice, right at the beginning and then at the midpoint. And the universal religion is the one that sponsors that. And so through all of the haze, that's going to be that sort of occult religious aspect that we're going to want to have focused on, to see how it's going to be the glue that's going to bring this together.
Yeah, so we have, before I forget, because you just mentioned the Antichrist, and recently somebody told me that that story is an invention of the Jesuits and that the Antichrist is the Catholic Church itself. What say you?
Well, yeah, you hear a lot of that. And you also hear that the Jesuits are at the top of the order, and they answer to the black nobility of the Italians, which goes into the royal bloodlines and higher levels of the secret societies. So you have to sort of understand where the Jesuits fit first. They are the new Templars that were set up in the church, and they are very much into the Mother Mary apparitions, and their whole creation was created through the visions that Ignatius of Loyola had, that he would become a soldier within the church and then change the church to become the Templar during the New Babylon. So there's a relationship there, but they have their own agenda within the Catholic Church. So the Jesuits aren't Babylon, but the Catholic religion will be probably part of Babylon. But not necessarily what we know it as today. It is a universal religion. I think there's a lot of Genesis things going on within the Roman Catholic Church, but it will be a significant part of it. But I think it's going to be replaced with new doctrine that's all polytheism. And if we go to the 7 hills that are talked about in Revelation 17, Vatican Hill isn't in the original 7 hills of Rome.
Yeah.
So it's like a branch, and it's almost a branch of the Palatine Hill and the religious cult that was there with the Sibylline prophecies and things. And so it's going to be part of it. But understand that Babylon is it's a number of things. It is so you have to understand it in all of the descriptions. I mean, it's said to be, I think, 9 times to be a city in Revelation 14 through 18. So we know it's a city, and we know it sits on 7 hills where that city is, which probably is the 7 hills that Romulus and Remus created Rome on in the original Rome. And it is a mystery religion, as it's described, mystery Babylon, Mysterian in Greek, and all the allegories are about this polytheist religion. So it's a religion and it's a city. And we know it is a economic organization in terms when it comes to its full fruition, because it will grow rich, and it will probably take a tribute on all the transactions that happen in the world. Just as in Revelation 18, all the merchants made money on Babylon, and at its destructions, they're quite upset. So it is going to control all of that, but we'll take a value-added tax, a tribute, whatever you want to call it, on every electronic transfer that's going to happen. So very powerful economic organization as well. And it is also the beast religion and the beast sort of genesis to bringing it together. And the woman rides the 10 kings of the 7 empires past, and has always been part of that organizational structure. So it's going to have heavy political influence like Rome did, and maybe even centered in Rome, but it's going to morph into an umbrella polytheist religion that tries to unite all of the religions under one umbrella organization.
Okay, thanks for clearing that up. So now let's start with Gaia.
Yeah.
Very popular word these days. A lot of interpretations out there.
Yeah.
And but in Greek mythology, it's pretty clear what happened. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you want to be a little bit clearer on what you say is clear.
As far as I know, she cohabitated with Uranus and became the mother of the Titans. And those Titans then later on were overthrown by the Olympians.
Yes. So that's very important. I wanted to see whether or not that's the direction that you were going on it. So, and you'll see in Greek mythology that it's either Uranus or Kronos, and they're either 2 different consorts of Gaia, or it's the same name for the same god, but they're all parent gods. We need to understand, we're going to understand whether or not it's the Greek pantheon the Egyptian pantheon, the Sumerian pantheon, or all around the world, is you have two sets of gods, and then you have the demigods below that. And so the parent gods are what you were talking about, and they have offspring gods, so like Zeus and Athena and Poseidon, and yeah, all of these are offspring gods that supposedly overthrow the parent gods. The trouble with that understanding is that these are immortal beings, so you don't overthrow them, and unless they go somewhere, so either to a prison or that they kill them. And a lot of the mythology suggests that these parent gods died. Well, you can't kill a parent god. So I think what happened there is, and we need to understand as we're looking at history, whether or not people are religious or not, it starts to make sense out of prehistory if you understand there's a flood, because there's two sets of histories that sort of get conflated. Now, the offspring gods are created before the flood, but they tend to survive after the flood. So like Zeus and Baal and Osiris as the parent gods, and Isis and goddesses like Ashtaroth or Astarte or Ishtar, or some of the various in the Middle East, they're part of the post-diluvian aspect, just as the Olympian gods are part. So they're not the ones that immediately go to the abyss. And they also create giants. Typically, it seems after the flood, because most of the accounts, like with Hercules, seems to be more post-diluvian than antediluvian, although giants have kind of the same names both before the flood. So you have a Hercules that's looked upon as a god and or an antediluvian giant, and then you have Hercules that's possibly the post-diluvian giant. So we need to understand that, and that it's likely what happened is that the parent gods went to the abyss, as is described in Pistis Sophia, where it describes these parent gods in these cells. And that's a Gnostic gospel if people wanted to look it up. And they give all of these different descriptions of these parent gods that are there. And that the host of the rebellious ones, which is like the host of heaven, the angels, these are fallen angels, is defined as not only a host, but as an army with rank and orders. And so if the head angels and the most evil of them are removed into the abyss, into Tartarus, in this case using the Greek word for the abyss, into the prison that's located in the underworld, in Hades, in Sheol, two different places, but one's located within the other place, then it implies that there would be, because of the rank, other ones would move up to replace them, right? So the offspring gods may or may not be offsprings, but just lower ranked angels that move up to take over. But then they kind of disappear after the flood, after a while, after creating giants and things as well, right? And they kind of disappear. It doesn't matter whether it's the Olympian gods, it's the offspring gods of Egypt, or the Baalim in the Bible, they kind of disappear. And I think that's because they create giants and do things against the laws of creation again, and against humankind, create crimes against humanity is what I'm trying to say there. And I think they end up going to the abyss as well. And that's why you don't have that interaction going on anymore, but you seem to have had it on both sides of the flood. And if you understand that those offspring gods move up and take over, they're going to assume a lot of the antediluvian, the pre-flood mythology or history or mythos along with them. So Poseidon, for example, is an offspring god, but Iapetus is sort of that equivalent before, and the god of the sea before. Both create giants, as I said, just as Poseidon creates the 10 Titan and Earthborn hero kings that manage Atlantis, right? And just as Iapetus created, through a human female as well, giants like Gog, Magog, and Albion. So they both did it. And I think they're just sort of assuming that whole sort of history as being promoted into that position. And I think that's where you get that conflation. So when you're trying to look at some of the mythologies, you kind of have to place it, okay, with where they actually fit in that chronology to understand what's going on and when it happened.
Mm-hmm. We know that some of the upper Nazis, and there was a division that was very interested in the occult.
Yes.
And we know that a lot of them, they thought that, yeah, they were the pedigree of Atlantean gods.
They did, yep.
Yeah, and you know what I just thought? Maybe that is one of the reasons why the Nazis had these delusional ideas about their omnipotence and
Yes.
what have you, because what I don't see the little g gods as a positive influence here.
No, they're not. The demigods turn significantly evil, and turned against and fought against the offspring gods. And many of them went to Tartarus. So whether or not, again, that was actually against the parent gods before the flood or again after the flood, it's hard to know, because most of the accounts we get as Zeus and Hercules, and Hercules being a demigod fighting with Zeus and the Olympian gods against the rebellious giants. But yeah, the demigods turned evil in all the accounts and paraded the antediluvian world into the apocalypse by water, and were the most significant event, so much so that the gods in polytheism rose up against them. It was so bad. And in monotheism, it's the God of the Bible that says, we're going to eliminate the violence and the evil on the earth, noting that the creation of the Nephilim, the same variant story as what happens with Poseidon creating the 10 demigod kings, or Hercules' creation. That's Genesis 6:1-4, which is the preamble to the flood story. And it's intimately connected. So you get that sort of consistency, just a different polytheist lens that are going in there. But in all cases, these were extraordinarily evil. And they also have a place in the abyss. As Ezekiel 32 talks about, these are the terrible ones that did horrible things against humanity and were killed, so that their spirit were locked into the abyss. They don't wander like some of the other demon spirits. So yes, the demigods were, and then I think they were created by the gods, and my sort of understanding of prehistory, to destroy humanity, because they didn't want humanity, or the parent gods and the offspring gods did not want humanity to be raised up like angels in the future time. And whereas the New Testament says we will judge those angels for their crimes against humanity and creation.
So in other words, this cohabitation and bringing forth children between Gaia and Uranus was, it set in motion a series of events that were ultimately not very good for humanity. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
You know why I ask? Because interestingly enough, in astrology, Uranus stands for fundamental changes, chaos, surprise, and things like that. And I find it interesting that that is associated with that. And then we have this story here of Uranus and Gaia.
Yeah. So, and one takes from that is that the reign of the parent gods was so atrocious that even their allegorical or literal offspring gods rose up against them. Right? So, I mean, it was horrible for everybody that they were ruling over. And I think, you know, the idea that they would have a realm on their own and be completely different than what the God of the Bible would like to see it was playing out, and it didn't play out very, very well. And then it repeated again once the offspring gods who took power. And I think there's a implication here that this world is kind of corrupt, and it's been corrupted by these gods. But when they took a physical form, which is how they created physical giants, I don't know whether the offspring gods were physical gods or they were just angels from before, whether, you know, that's an allegory that's recorded in polytheism or it's literal, that when they took physical form, that they were also affected by everything that happens. So yeah, the emotions, the good and evil, vengeance, love, I mean, the whole sort of impact of our senses. And I think that was something that got the better of them as the parent gods, then the offspring gods, and the demigods, and of course humans. I mean, we've all done the same kinds of things.
Exactly. And sometimes I wonder if we learned that from them, you know, because I see all the evil stuff there, from war to infanticide to patricide. There's nothing that the so-called gods leave unturned.
And in the book of Enoch, it talks about Azazel as the, you know, chief of the rebellious angels, one of the Satans, with Satan at the top. He's the one accredited with teaching the art of war to humankind and how to make the weapons. So he introduced it to the world. And whether or not that was just introduced to the giants and to humans or to the offspring gods, but they're the ones who had the knowledge and made it happen in the physical world. So when you look at where does war come from, and it comes through an idea and a concept that probably happened in the angelic rebellion against God, right? That there was a war in heaven back then that has not yet been resolved, but the Adamites are the resolution to that war. And that as you move forward, you have the demigods who are utilizing that technology in war to enslave humankind, both before and after the flood. And those are the divine representatives of those gods and their dynasties and their noble elite that rules the world, where it's a feudal system just for their sort of bloodlines and genealogies, and that you'll have all of humankind basically underneath who don't have those specific genes and blood types, that will be the poor, the slave class, and a very, very small merchant class. But all of the major business and all of the religion and all of the ruling class and the army ruling class is all run by the noble elite. And that's the organizational system that's sort of come down through history to us. And as divine representatives of Earth, they're there not to do kind things to the humans.
Yeah. So you just mentioned Azazel, and I know you say that he's the same as Shemyaza.
I think so, yes.
Yeah. Okay. There are a lot of people who say otherwise, but okay, we leave it at that. And there is I read one interesting story where Ishtar allegedly, she convinced Shemyaza to take off his wings and show them to her. And she took the wings and she ascended to heaven. And so what do you make of that story? Sure.
And just let me sort of come back to the Shemyaza thing first. So there are there's 4 or 5, maybe more different variations of the spelling of Shemyaza in the book of Enoch. So I don't want to totally, say that there wasn't another angel that had maybe a similar spelling. So we need to be aware of that. Now with Ishtar, receiving the wings to become a demigod, somehow we're to sort of understand that she was like promoted to angel-like, which similarly a fellow that was named of Enoch, probably of the lineage of Cain, in the third book of Enoch, was promoted to be Metatron as his angelic status through knowledge that he had learned. So I don't think that actually happens, although I don't know the extent of the powers. It just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me, because none of that happened with any of the demigods that they created, right? So, but Ishtar is also conflated with there's almost two beings that are being talked here. There's a goddess, and then there's one that Azazel gave most of his knowledge to, right? And he would have slept with Ishtar because that was one of the wives, right? And she would have been a human by that sort of definition and producing the Nephilim. So I think there's probably two different Ishtars here. There's the goddess and there's a human that would have taken their name after the goddess. And in the book of Enoch, you have an accounting that's kind of related to that these women who produced the demigods, the Nephilim, were changed to something called a siren, which is kind of connected to the mermaids as you go through the various mythologies like that. Somehow they're this being that did morph to a certain degree, and are maybe looked upon as a demigod, and a mother goddess of a demigod, but not a true god. So I think maybe they're kind of raised up in that status level. So maybe an allegorical sort of understanding, but I don't think that a human would be raised up to the level of a goddess, because they just don't look at humans as being stock that is worthy to be in existence, let alone to be like them.
And so would you say that the goddess worship predated how can I say this, before some males took over and became more prominent gods?
Before who took over and became prominent gods?
Male gods like Zeus.
Male gods, yeah. Yeah, I think in polytheism, there's a duality there that's a constant, and it is from the beginning. So if you look at from the Gnostic perspective, you have a queen of heaven who is Sophia. And she's the one who is, with this sort of nebulous kind of life force, is going to produce the seven angels that the Gnostics say the God of the Bible was one of them, went rogue, right? So I think that's there from the beginning. And Sophia would be very much a Gaia, right? Would be one of the parent gods, would be very much a Tiamat in the Sumerian pantheon. And I would sort of place that individual there. What is interesting is when you start to look at it from a Tiamat perspective, that Tiamat is also like a Leviathan type creature, and has many different names around the world, whether or not it's Lotan and many, many other names that's known in all the different cultures. And that goddess is actually slain, and in the Bible Leviathan is slain, and the second Leviathan would be slain in the end time, which would be thought to be the male god that we would know as Satan, right? Halel is the closest thing that we get in the Bible to that being his name, and or Gadriel, which may be another title of his name, meaning, you know, the wall of God that shows up in the book of Enoch that was in the Garden of Eden. because only we know that Satan was in the Garden of Eden, right? So just making some connecting of the dots there. So yeah, I think that you have this understanding of the Queen of Heaven in that duality that was there from the beginning and will come again in this polytheist religion in the end time, just as that woman who would be perhaps an allegory for Gaia in this aspect, or Sophia in this aspect, or any of the parent goddesses, or the offspring Queen of Heavens that are named, and there's many of them, that is going to be riding the empire as part of that organizational structure I talked about earlier.
Mm. There are some Catholic depictions that where many people think that is Mary, but it's not. It's actually the Queen of Heaven.
Yes.
And it's pretty obvious. So my question is, when the Catholic Church was founded and Constantine declared it, state religion is now Christianity. So, of course, they were still very close to that time when, they were worshiping different gods.
Yes.
So do you think that because of the pagans, that the Catholic Church allowed certain deities to, let's say, enter the church and then they get a Christian makeover or a thing here? Or,
Yes. So you have all sorts of idolatry enter into the Roman Church at the time of Constantine. So it's no longer the Jerusalem Church. That's more Judaic based with the Messiah sort of extension onto that. You have what's going on with Constantine. He wants to unite the empire. And he's using the Christianity to come to power on, but he doesn't want to impose a religion that is going to be rejected by, say, over half of the empire and in many countries. So Mithraism is one of the more popular polytheist religions in Rome at that time. And it's connected to its root religion, which is Zoroastrian of the Aryans, right? And of the Persians, which are, Aryans, as they take their lineage back to. And so Mithra was one of these gods who also said to have been resurrected, but would have been more of a demigod and would have been more of a Nephilim type of reincarnation type of thing, where the spirit doesn't go to sleep like humans do. And he was born on December 25, and Sol Invictus, which is also part of that winter festival, is also all sort of wrapped into the 12 days of Christmas and things, and culminating. So you have a lot of these things that are being moved in and homogenized into one sort of religion, including moving the Sabbath to the Sunday, which is, obviously the god of the sun and the holy day of Mithra. But you also have other things that are coming in that are kind of representative of other religions. And in particular, of note to, I think, what we're talking about is they're going to represent, because remember, Egypt was a big part of the Roman Empire, right? They're going to bring in a lot of imagery of the Egyptian religion and pantheon. And so the depiction of Mary with the baby Jesus is typically the same depiction as Isis and Horus that comes in, right? So now you have an offspring goddess with some sort of demigod or god, because somehow it's created through some sort of really ridiculous thing that happens to Osiris, who's spread into many pieces and somehow produces a child. But I guess gods can do that. So either another god or a demigod. It's hard to sort of distinguish it. I would lean more to another sort of offspring god, but is that sort of holy trinity of the Gnostics and the Freemasons, as we understand it from Gnosticism. That's an allegory for the original. So with Satan as being one of the patriarchs of the gods, and a goddess like a Tiamat, like a Gaia. And then you have Horus, which is the offspring and kind of an allegory for the Antichrist as it's understood by secret societies.
Mm-hmm. You know what I just thought? Sometimes weird thoughts struck me. I have the impression that there is an overall tendency to drag humanity into a type of hive mind.
Yes.
Yeah?
There is. Yeah.
And funny enough, hives are ruled by a queen, not by a king.
Yes. And people need to remember in the dualism of polytheism, like the male god and the female goddess were equal at a minimum. And not only was the female goddess a fertility goddess, but also in a lot of cases a war goddess as well. So, and is sort of the ability to have the continuation of creating things, right? As opposed to the male god that doesn't seem to do that. And so for all of those reasons, one might look at the duality with the goddess as being slightly more powerful than the male god, because of that creative sort of activity.
Yeah, there is a very, very, not to put down any of the genders, but both genders also have a very, very dark side.
Yeah, they are. And as we get into the end time, so if you can imagine this Queen of Heaven, if you can imagine this as the Babylon and being connected to it, that's going to be the religion that we see first. But then at the midpoint of the last 7 years, you have Antichrist and Satan that's going to destroy Babylon and establish a religion, as the book of Daniel talks about, that their fathers didn't know. So I'm not sure how all of that comes about in terms of the fallen angel aspect of it, but certainly there's going to be this preeminence of the female aspect of the religion for, you know, a period of time that begins before the last 7 years, but all of a sudden comes to an abrupt halt when Antichrist and the 10 kings who give him his power destroy the city of Babylon, destroy the religion, and Antichrist crowns himself as God in the temple and creating this whole new religion and worship where people are going to worship him and Satan.
Mm.
So there's a split there that is kind of obscured, but there is a split there.
Yeah. I would subscribe to that. Yeah. So Queen of Heaven is a title that, let's say, Semiramis, Inanna, Ishtar, Isis, what have you. Would you say that ultimately that these are different names for one and the same entity, depending on what culture is talking about them?
Yes, I would, but with that nuance that you have two Queen of Heavens, the parent goddess, and then the replacement offspring goddess. So, you know, if you look at the 7 planets, for example, that has different gods applied to it. You know, if I look at the moon, for example, it's got Artemis of the Greek culture. That's an offspring god, would be a Queen of Heaven type figure. Diana of Rome, Isis of Egypt, Inanna of Sumeria, which would be, you know, some people look at her as an offspring or a parent god, and Astarte of Canaan. And then Venus typically is a parent god, which is typically associated with Aphrodite in Greece, but Aphrodite is not a parent god, and you don't get Gaia listed in there. Gaia should be one of those two gods. Roman Venus, Sekhmet and Hathor in Egypt as a parent god. Inanna again, so there might be, you know, maybe a different name that should be in there between Inanna and, let's say, an Ishtar or somebody else, and then you got Astarte, so, or Ashtaroth, which is a parent god of the sort of the Canaanite pantheon as well. And typically these mother goddesses, in a lot of cases, they will be consorts of the succeeding offspring god, like Ashtaroth and Baal, right? And or Inanna and Anu, and or there's a variation of these different gods that would have, after the flood, been a consort with her. So I think, but you have Enlil and Enki that are sort of coming to the top there, and I guess that's what the point I was trying to make. So there's some nuances in there that you kind of have to be aware of. They don't always make perfect sense, but I think that's the conflating again of those mythoses into one, when they should really be split. And so there's probably some of that corruption that sort of comes down through history with that in terms of our understanding. But yeah, you could look at two for sure, I guess, is the simple answer.
Yeah. So in other words, in our example now, Uranus and Gaia, they would be the parent gods, the original ones.
Yeah. And let's say in Revelation 9 that those that are in the abyss, you have the parent and the offspring gods being released. Well, then they would go back to the same hierarchical order from before. And you would think that in the end time, the parent gods would assume their leadership roles, with the offspring gods subservient to them.
Well, there is another, because we talked, I don't know, I'm getting these beep beep. Because we talked about Putin, there's another interesting, let's say parallel, Ninhursag. And not Ninhursag. No.
Yes.
Ninurta.
Ninurta, yes.
Ninurta.
Kind of a, yeah.
And that symbol, the double-headed eagle.
Yep.
That was Ninurta's symbol. And Russia has it as well. The Scottish York Rite has it.
Yep. Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that these modern double-headed eagles go back to that symbol.
Oh, absolutely they do. And so you have the Anunnaki gods with the bird faces, and some of them have a human face, which is, kind of two faces of the cherubim that we get, and they have wings, so they're some sort of angelic being. And so I think that the symbol of the eagle, whether it's single or double eagle, is a sort of taciturn genealogy that they trace their bloodlines back in terms of the order of the angel or a specific angel, obviously through a Nephilim or a Rephaim within that genealogies. And here's kind of how I get there. So you've got the Seraphim angels that are serpent-faced, right? And you get a lot of serpentine gods and a lot of serpentine kings and things like that. And they would have, their offspring initially looked just like them. So if you had an eagle-faced god, one that wasn't going to show four faces and scare the heck out of everybody, but just take one in that physical form and has an offspring, they're going to create Nephilim like that. And those are the Tengu gods, as they're known in Southeast Asia. And they produced a warrior and a priest class. And you can Google Tengu and get a picture of them. They are the same sort of beings that created the earthly Anunnaki in Sumeria, or the Zabalba of the Kisha Maya, or the Kamazots, which is a branch of it, which is the house of the bat, Nephilim in the Kisha Maya. And you get this all around the world. So it's a specific angel. Now, if you look at gods going the Greek mythology, which gives the best example, as with Zeus or Apollo, they are depicted with a chariot with 6 horses, or sometimes more or less, but horses that are pulling it. Sometimes they're depicted as a unicorn horse, which is another image that comes up on coats of arms and taciturn symbols of genealogy, just as you've got lions and you've got serpents and dragons and stuff. So lots of different ones that show up on the coat of arms, all with a meaning. And this is thought to be an allegory for their throne on earth, right? That it's a mobile throne. And that starts to come together when you look at Ezekiel 1 and Ezekiel 10, where, and a couple other passages where the cherubim are the ones that pulled God's chariot in Ezekiel 1 and 10, and you got the Elephantine, which are the ones in the wheels that look like cherubim, except for one face is different. That's a different angel order. And that these are cherubim angels that had offspring. And so, yes, one needs to be aware of what's on the various coat of arms. So the unicorn was on the Hanover coat of arms, two of them. And again, that's an allegory for not only this creature that the Nephilim rode into war in before the flood, but also an allegory for an angelic being as you get into the mythos of the unicorn. And I think that's an allegory for the cherubim as well. And so you have that on the coat of arms of the Stuarts, and in combination now with in a lot of the various intermarriages of the coat of arms with the Windsor families, which come out of the Hanovers, you have that sort of merging of the unicorn and the lion that's on their coat of arms. And so,
and the lion is a pharaonic symbol.
Yeah, well, and you get gods like Sekhmet that we talked about earlier as a female goddess, or Bast, or Nergal, and many, many other gods that were lion gods. And they also produced offspring as well. And you have all of these lion kinds of warriors in Egypt and in Sumeria. And then biblically, you get the lion-like men of Moab and Gad, and Arioch in the King of the War of Giants in Genesis 14, which Arioch means lion-like. And so you get all of these sort of connections that indicate that when you're looking at that eagle, it is a very, very important symbol to the genealogies and the bloodlines and to the secret societies. And some people look at the eagle as not as an eagle, but maybe as a phoenix. And so some people conflate that in the secret societies. I think they're a little bit separate in the meaning and a little bit different in their depiction. So I tend not to try and conflate those two. But I think when we're looking at that eagle, we're looking at the bloodlines of those giants that come from the Anunnaki out of Sumeria, or the cherubim.
Yeah, and that would, to me, it makes sense that these bloodline families, that somehow they will signal to the rest of the world where they come from, what they believe they come from. If the rest of the world notices it or not, that they don't care.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very important because it's their sort of written history in the coat of arms, or depictions that they have on their buildings that they would live in, or castles and things like that. And you notice when there is a new bloodline that's intermarried in, they'll take along the coat of arms, but then there'll be some changes, some small changes on that coat of arms as that other bloodline is sort of reflected into it, and some of them, I mean, I'm no expert on trying to decode all of them. Like you get, like the Anjou bloodlines that have, like the fleur-de-lis that's sort of encoded into it, and things like that. But I think when you look at it as a whole, if you understand that they're trying to describe their family bloodlines to people who understand those symbols so they know who they are, where they fit into the hierarchy, it makes some sense.
Yeah, interesting little side note. Trump's coat of arms, he has a unicorn as well.
Yeah.
I think so. What it definitely has, if I remember correctly, but what it definitely has is this square, and the hand with the white glove.
Oh yeah, yeah.
The Freemasonry hand.
The Freemasonry hand, and I think he, you know, he's not pure in the bloodline. He's probably quite low level, and which is probably one of the reasons why a lot of them turned against him. But he obviously ran up against a wall, and because he switched sides, he was a Democrat, and they weren't going to let him run for power, so he just changed sides. And I think that's why the whole Western world rose up against him, because they looked at him as knowing too much.
Yeah.
And he certainly ripped the scab off of a lot of things that it may not be done yet, and that he wasn't pulling the party line, so to speak. He was, you know, but I don't think he was that far offside in terms of what they were doing. I think he just wanted a bigger role for the United States, and he ran to make sure that that was going to happen, because the complete directional play has been is to reduce the American power and place in the world so that you can have more of an equal New World Order of those 10 groups of nations. So I think he was saying, no, that's not how it's going to be. And they said, yeah, that's how it's going to be.
Yeah. So the Seraphim, you already mentioned them, and Ninhursag is celebrated as the lady of the Serpent Lady.
The Serpent Lady. And
so is there a connection to the Seraphim, do you think?
Yes.
Or is that a coincidence?
There's never a coincidence, I don't think. And so many of the parent gods and offspring gods are described as serpents, just as, you know, Enki is a serpent god, and Zeus was originally a serpent god, and Osiris is a serpent god as the offspring gods. But Ninhursag is a parent god from before the flood, right? She's producing offspring gods, as like what Gaia does. And she is depicted as a serpent. And in a Christian or a Judaic understanding of it, you understand angels are seraphims, and they have 6 wings as part of their description. And they're also part of being known as sort of fiery sort of angels, because they're working in the altar before God in the stones of fire. And they have a serpent face. And these are the watchers, part of the watchers. And just as the cherubim are part of the watchers. So in Enoch, you have the archangels, you have the seraphim, you have the cherubim, and you have the Ophanim. And the Ophanim are the ones in the wheel, and the wheel in that application is where it's referring to the angels as opposed to an actual wheel, which is Gilgal. The Hebrew word for wheel for the beings within the wheel is Ophan, and I am is the male plural. So when we look at the seraphim, they produce their offspring, gods like them, probably, and produce demigods that look like them as well. So when you see whether or not it's Ninhursag or the Sumerian gods that are serpent-like, or the original Greek gods, or the many of the gods in Egypt, although in the Occult gods of the original Urshu watchers and things, there's a few different things like crocodiles and some other sort of reptilian things that are going on with them. But the plumed serpent, the feathered serpent of the Kisha Maya, the Nagas of India, the dragon creator gods of China, they're talking about the same order of watchers. And for people who say that watcher does not show up in the Bible, it does. It shows up 4 times in the book of Daniel, and Daniel 4, as I recall. And they come from the throne, dictating governance to the world from the throne of God. And so they are part of the watchers, the ones who are sort of awake all of the time and around the throne of God. And you would have that same counterfeit throne sat up on earth. So you'd have the same kinds of watchers with the different ranks, different kinds of angels. That's why you get the same kinds of imagery as in the chariot of the gods, or the chariot of Apollo or Zeus that we talked about with the cherubim leading it. You have that created on earth through the Council of the Gods, ruling over the 70 nations. Council of the Gods in Psalm 82, and the 70 nations, both before and after the flood, in Deuteronomy 32.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, my goodness, that is such a vast area. It is so convoluted. But on the other hand, I have to say, when I researched that topic, and you know that I have never been a fan of so-called royalty. Yeah, that is something that simply does not exist in my book. That's a made-up story to rule others. Yeah, and then okay, you have these so-called nobility that is proud that they have a bloodline, blah blah blah. Yeah. But honestly, once you unravel that thing of so-called nobility, aristocracy, what it really is, what it boils down, my goodness, that subject to me is buried for all times.
Yeah, and it's such a good point, because they say it's true. We can connect the dots as to how they get there, but we don't know whether or not those genealogies are accurate or not. But what's
they believe
important
it.
for people, that's the important thing, is that when I tell people, because people ask me, well, do you believe all of that? And it doesn't matter what I believe. It matters what they believe, and more importantly, with what they're doing with their belief.
Exactly. And because they have the resources to do what they want with their belief structure, you better get prepared, because
you better.
If you are in the crosshairs, you are in the crosshairs. End of story. You don't have to believe the same thing as they do.
No, you don't. No, and they don't care whether you believe it or not, but eventually they'll eliminate you as this thing will progress, because it always gets to that point. Because as you say, in the hive mind, you can't have a different belief or a different position. They're just going to eliminate you. You may not be the first one, but you can count on it. They're coming for you if you don't fall into line.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the last 2 years have shown us that extensively, that you have a different opinion, or here goes your salary, fired. Wow.
Yeah, and they have so much power, they can continue to get away with it, and they are firing people for misinformation because you're dangerous, even though you've told the truth and it'll be proven to be the truth, but they've already destroyed you and they never are accountable for it.
Yeah.
You can this is going to heat up. The more resistance, the more they will push back. They have an agenda. They want a globalist society. They have an agenda of how they want that to look, and they do not want anybody who stands against them. And so, to the American audience that I talk to every once in a while on similar sort of topics to this, is you need to understand that all the American Constitution and most other constitutions around the world were designed by polytheists to use it against anybody who disagrees with them down the road. And we're seeing that starting to happen now. And I like to say, we're kind of in the post-constitutional and human rights period already. We've been shown that in Canada, where I'm from, that over and over and over, the courts ruled against our so-called rights in the Constitution. They have ruled that they are privileges, and they are not rights, and they can do whatever they want when they want. And the only way of turning that back around is to fight back. But when that happens, you're going to get a lot of conflict, because they're just not going to concede the power that they have. And they control all the different levels. They control the judicial, they control the education, they control the sciences, they control the medicine, they control the companies now. You see all these, I hate the word, these woke companies that are, you know, not after the betterment of their employees, the planet, or their country. They're only about the agenda of the woke belief, which is typical fascism, right? This is a fascist belief that is being imposed at all levels everywhere. But there will be pushback, and we'll see what happens. I know. I know in Canada, the truckers that have been demonstrating. I don't know whether or not
the coverage is. I follow that.
Oh, you do? Good. I mean, they have been called the most horrific things by the politicians, by the media. I mean, and none of it's true. I mean, you have two people that they would have planted in there wearing face masks. One's got a trucker flag that's got a Confederate, or a truck on a Confederate flag. One's got a Nazi flag. Nobody knows who they are. They weren't there for a long period of time, like half a day, just enough to get their photo shot, and then they disappear. And they're the only people in the whole protest that had a mask on. I mean, they're protesting masks and the heavy-duty mandates, but everybody says, "Oh, that proves they're all racist." Well, that's a plant. That's what the fascists do. But the media, you know, just climbed all over it, and the politicians did. But you know, one thing about trucks, you can't move them unless they decide to move them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I know today Trudeau granted himself extraordinary powers that would not be appropriate in normal times.
I have not heard that, and he does that with a minority government. He can't even legislate that by himself. But that's what tyrants do, and he ran an election on creating a subhuman class and spoke against them all the way through because they have unacceptable beliefs. Yeah. Unbelievable that we have such a racist, such a tyrant, but the Canadians voted them back in. So we get the government we deserve.
Yeah, I'm not so sure. I think all elections are faked, without exception.
Well, they certainly have things on the scales like the media that, I mean, and things have really sort of, to use a term intentionally, progressively gotten worse in my lifetime, because the things that Trudeau has done, he would have been run out of the party and political system in the country, 20 or 30 years ago, but not today.
Yeah, young global leaders.
Yes, yes, and again, what I like to tell, sort of my opinion to tell people is that there are globalists in most of the parties.
Yeah, sure.
So be careful on which political party that you say you side with. And it's okay to side with any political party that you want, but look for that globalist thing. If they show any signs of globalism, you cannot be part of it. And one of the things that we're seeing in North America is we're seeing a lot of the old, which would be understood as in the US version as the establishment Republicans or the established conservatives in Canada, starting to be pushed out of the conservative movement, because those are the globalists and the ones who want perpetual war.
Okay, so fantastic first hour, Gary. Yeah, so we will talk on the other side and see the patrons, and to the other people, thanks for listening, and we see you next time.
We shall.